A couple of other very interesting observations. I saw lots in each house of uses on a faucet where they just flipped it on and flipped it off. I got a time stamp when we went from 0 to usually about 1 gallon a minute, plus or minus a little bit. And sometimes in the same second, I would get a time stamp where it had gone back to 0. In other cases, it was in the next second. And that varied in these houses from 12 to 46% of the total uses. So it has a lot to do with people's habits in terms of how they use products. And the other interesting thing that we notice here is that there were quite a few instances where somebody would either turn the faucet on all cold and then turn it off, probably for hand washing. In other cases where the habit was to turn it on to the all hot setting. I don't know whether it was a two-handle or single handle, except that I know there was only hot water flow. And they shut it off before the water ever got to 80 degrees. So clearly, whatever they were using the faucet for, they were drawing hot water, but they didn't ever expect that they'd actually get it to use because they turned it off before it got hot. And I think for the Hot Water Forum, I'm going to do another presentation tomorrow, which will focus on hot water uses. But I think one of the really interesting things here is that we look for, and there's tests being developed to try and revise the standard for how we measure water heater efficiency. And I think, as one of the other presenters mentioned, I think that there are some issues relative to water heater efficiency because we're not looking at the system performance so much, but just trying to look at introducing and looking at recovery times on water heaters. But every time we have 10 to 19% of the faucet uses where we're drawing hot water into the hot water line, but it's never used, we're drawing cold water into the water heater, and we're compromising the efficiency, and then we're also taking some of that heat was in the hot water and using it to warm the rooms where the pipes are. So there's some interesting observations of things I think we can learn here in terms of hot water. This slide isn't on your CDs because I just added it last week. So I got some intern help to help me analyze the data. But for the Green Technical Committee, in terms of looking at pipe sizing and wanting to understand simultaneous use, we went into the different homes and took a look at where we saw simultaneous use. So this would be kind of an interesting study. What we did just sort of in conclusion here, on the study, as we ran it 8 weeks, we went into the homes and just instrumented them and didn't make any changes in the home in terms of any of the fixtures or flow rates to get a baseline data. And what we'll be doing next week is going in and interviewing the families because we have lots of data which sort of give us a virtual picture of what was going on in terms of how they use faucet and shower products. But we want to go ahead and do some focus group interviews with the individual families, share them what we're seeing, and from what we're seeing, we have lots of questions about what were you doing? So we want to get some good qualitative data from them in terms of learning and giving them some feedback on what we saw. And over the next 4 weeks, we'll make some changes. We're going to put some demand-controlled recirculation pumps in the houses. We're going to try some different flow rates, some different types of faucets, to do a phase 2 and compare that with phase 1 to see what the results are. And I'm planning to be able to share some of those results at the Water Smart Innovations Conference in October. So, any questions?
Well, one thing for you to look at is what's the hot water temperature? Because you could see like shower temperatures. What temperature do people shower at?
The showering temperature is interesting. It's sort of a bipolar thing, so I don't know, and I'm pretty sure it probably has to do with men and women, but shower temperatures are in the 102 to 105 degree range for one of the nodes, and the other node is probably 95, 98 degrees pretty consistently. And from what I've heard anecdotally from some of the families, it seems that the females tend to shower a little bit higher temperature than the men. Also, as I looked at these houses, for 3 of the houses, we were looking at shower temperatures, hot water temperatures, excuse me, that were delivered in the 120, 125 degree range. There was one house where the water temperature, when they ran the hot water long enough, got up to be above 130. It was quite hot. The other thing about the homes is they're in the north part of Indianapolis. They're a long ways away from the water treatment plants. And so the cold water temperature, when they first started in the morning, tended to be in the 65 to 70 degree range, a little bit more of ambient house temperature. But after it run the water for a little while, it just dropped down to like 55 or 56 degrees. So it was pretty much the ground temperature that the pipe was buried in. Yes, up here.
Microphone on the way.
How old are these homes that you're speaking of?
I would say 20 to 25 years.
Okay, good. When in your presentation right now, I'm listening to what you're saying about people turning to hot water and so on. In my own house, the restroom that my wife and I utilize is the farthest fixture from the water heater.
Mm-hmm.
When I get up in the morning, I use the hot water to brush my teeth and to shave because I don't anticipate the hot water being there.
Yep.
By the time I turn it off to go get in the shower, I got hot water instantly. So
Yep.
I've adjusted my own self to do this,
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. That's a very good point. I would much rather we found a way, in terms of a retrofit situation, to be able to get hot water there without having to run the water. Or if you're going to run it, then use cold water, which is probably in a lot of those cases what you'd really rather use it for anyhow.
Craig, on the simultaneous use chart, it looked like some of those values said like 10 negative and one was were those typos or?
No, that's an artifact of cut and paste a spreadsheet.
Okay.
Those were the kitchen cells as you went down diagonally in the chart. And we had put a dash in, but it ended up to be left-hand justified.
Good catch, Bob.
Any other questions?
Just one question. I mean, you must look at a lot of water usage studies, I mean, over the years. I mean, do you normally see such a wide swing in the way people use showers?
Yeah, I mean, when I went back and looked at the residential uses of water study, and there's a number of studies done by the same group, Aquacraft Engineering on contract to AWA and others. They typically report in there really wide variations. If you look at gallons per shower or even flow rate per shower, there's a curve that comes up and there's a high node, but then it falls off and you have a much smaller number of incidences with very high flow rates, maybe 5-7 gallons a minute. It's a small incidence rate, but it shows a huge variation, and the same thing happens when they look at time of shower or gallons per shower, where in that report they've got a lot of that data. So yeah, that was 1,200 homes. So you'd think if anything there'd be a pretty good indication of central tendency, but what we're finding is that behavior is a really important factor in terms of anybody's ability to save water in the long run. I mean, we're doing the best we can in terms of limiting how much comes out of faucets and shower heads. We've limited the amount of water per flush in toilets, for instance. But how many times people use the toilets, how long they use the faucets and so forth, is a huge variation. One of the things that we haven't looked at specifically yet, but we're going back in the next week or so to look in the data, is to get an idea for faucet use. How many times are faucets actually used basically at their full flow as opposed to a partial flow? So I think on lavatory faucets, a lot of times people don't really use them full wide open for the very purpose that lavatory sinks tend to be smaller and there's a lot more splash if you have them wide open. You leave them wide open maybe when you're waiting to get hot water. But I don't know that you always leave them wide open, and so we're going to go try and look at our data and see what that tells us.